And welcome back.
Here we are. We've come back.
Part 3.
So we're here with, I'm Renee.
And I'm Jada, her daughter.
And
we're from Samuel Solutions, LLC.
And we are talking about my book, A Parent's Guide to Supporting Children in Learning at Home. So we're currently reading loud, and we're picking up where we last left off, which is on time to process. So I'm just going to jump right in.
Go for it.
Okay, so time spent teaching is less about presenting new information and more about creating opportunities for students to process the new information they have learned. Students need to grapple with new information. They need to discuss it. They need to have time to integrate their new learning with what they already know. This allows students to build more connections and to organize information in their mind so they can recall it when needed. So I'm just going to stop right there and talk about like that time to build connections.
Yeah.
And I think with COVID and the lack of, or I should say, interactions and the loss of learning time, like the loss of time together has reduced the opportunity for kids to process what they've learned.
Yeah. Right?
Like teachers are just getting in there whatever they could as quickly as they could and then sending them home to do the activities they would normally do in school that would really allow that knowledge to simmer.
I think also, like, when with online, like, everything's open book, so you're not required to actually think about the content.
It just is always there with you, so you don't have to really internalize it.
No, definitely not. Which is harder for younger students, like, younger kids. Like, I'm thinking of elementary schoolers and how much they're, I don't know, like, in a sense, like, they've been robbed this year of learning, like, key skills and how to, like, learning how to learn. And that has been, like, taken away from them because, I mean, how can you expect, like, I don't know, a 6, 7, 8-year-old to sit and stare at a computer screen, like, paying attention and actively
really
be able to process what's being given to them.
And so, I mean, it's really important for teachers to keep this in mind. And I realize that's not who we're talking to, but even when parents are working with children at home, making sure that we're not bombarding them with too many concepts at once and giving them the chance to really like get into the new concept, talk about it, and then have some dialogue, right? Like discuss it, help them make connections to other parts of life that this links to. That's really going to help build, I should say, move that into long-term memory.
Yeah. I mean, I think of when I'm studying and how if I don't understand, like, I mean, especially this year, I've had to teach myself, like, a lot of everything. And all the time I'd wake up for these early morning Zooms, like, rolling out of bed, turning on the camera, totally not in it to win it, kind of. And I'm getting these, like, math concepts thrown at me, and I have no idea what we're talking about until afterwards when I look back at the recordings that then I can, like, look and pause and then process and do a couple practice problems and then compare it to the previous sections and then relate how they're similar and then being able to then carry on properly and then take on a new piece of information and properly understand it.
But I think that's a great point. And I think it had more meaning the second time when you would look at the recordings than when you were sitting in the Zoom Live because you were sitting there trying to solve the problems. And now suddenly this lecture has relevance where when you're listening to it in the morning, it's just going right over your head.
And I could pause the video.
But what happens in live classrooms where you can't watch the recording again?
That's why I don't want to go back in person. I'm like, I don't know.
It's funny because when you were choosing your statistics class, you were choosing, do I take it live or, I remember a conversation about...
asynchronous or synchronous. So is it, like, a Zoom class or is it going to be, like, all computer? Like, just the computer, like, is teaching, like, recorded?
I remember, like, a defining piece of that decision was, can I go back and look at the recordings? Like, if it's synchronous and you're learning all together... We were wondering, would you be able to go back and watch the lectures? Because that was such an important piece for you. Definitely. So again, time to process. So when teaching new information, only approximately 30% of the time should be spent teaching new content. The other 70% needs to be filled with opportunities to process, apply, synthesize, and generalize what they have learned. Students need an opportunity to integrate new information with what they already know and organize, stretch, and articulate their thinking. Not only does this build understanding, but it also builds confidence. Following the 30-70 rule will limit your inclination to overload your child with new information.
And I feel like that's when students feel like they're feeling like dumb because they're overloaded with information. It's too much and they can't even tell you where they're lost because they're just lost in the whole thing, which was my problem a lot of the time because I would just be sitting there in class, everything going over my head, not realizing that because the teacher's not taking enough time to pause and really relate it back, and I wasn't very good at paying attention.
But if you had time to process the fact that you weren't paying attention, but there was an activity, a turn to the partner and talk about whatever the prompt is, that would bring you back in the conversation, and then you wouldn't lose so much information.
Yeah.
So I think it also, when you said you had a hard time identifying where you were stuck, that time to process gives children an opportunity to think, like, what questions do I still have about this? You know?
Which when I walk back through it myself, I'm able to then pinpoint, like, okay, this is the area I don't understand specifically, and I can ask the teacher questions. But when it's just overloaded, I get lost and overwhelmed, and then you're like, oh my God, when's the test?
Right, and I agree. All right, next section. So much to teach, so little time. The amount of information included in a complete curriculum in any subject area is completely overwhelming. When planning and delivering instruction, teachers are constantly making decisions about what to keep and what to cut. And this is often individualized for struggling learners. And boy, was that happening with COVID. I saw it in our high school all the time where teachers were just couldn't figure out how to get it all in and having to trim more and more and more. When time is of the essence, or you just feel like you are slipping further and further behind, teachers remember, cut the fluff and stick to the stuff. Stuff meaning core knowledge that will help students in the future. Sticking to the critical content, the foundational skills, and strategies the child will need to have in their toolbox in order for them to have enough prior knowledge to understand more complex concepts down the road. I think I read that wrong. Stick to the critical content, the foundational skills, and strategies the child will need to have in their toolbox in order for them to have enough prior knowledge to understand more complex concepts down the road. If working with a classroom teacher, collaborate with them to identify what is critical content and what can be trimmed if a student is overloaded. As much as you may not believe it, one-on-one instruction is found to be less effective than small group instruction.
Wait for it. Oh yeah, because there's so much pressure on the one student. Well, is that not the reasoning? Because I hated one-on-one instruction because I have this person like looking at me like specifically, like I get performance anxiety.
Okay, no, that's not the reason.
That's my reason. I don't like it.
The reason is because of digressions. Because becomes so personal, tutor and student, let's say. But I'm like, so how was your weekend? Did you have a really good time? Oh, and it becomes very personal and casual, and they tend to slip further and further away from the content when there's just one student.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, that's the reason why I do like one-on-one instruction.
So you like it because of the digressions, but you don't like it because of the pressure. Isn't that interesting? Well, it's not as effective because... well, let me just keep reading. How about you do that?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. Not only does small group instruction allow the students to learn from each other and to process information together, working in a small group creates a more formal setting that is less likely to get bogged down by personal conversations. Whether working one-on-one, in a small group, or with an entire class of students, be careful to avoid digressions. Off-topic conversations, tangents, and personal stories that aren't purposeful and directly related to the topic all lead to a loss of instructional time.
That's my favorite.
When the teacher gets distracted on a tangent.
So then we can start talking about everything else.
And then they get further and further and further away from what they should be teaching.
Yeah.
Even if you are teaching and learning one-on-one from home, and you feel like you have all the time in the world, when a 20-minute math lesson turns into a 40-minute event every day, learning will become exhausting. If learning one-on-one from home, connect with other families with children following the same curriculum to create opportunities for the children to virtually review and practice what they've learned together.
So I also think, though, I mean, I think of how all of my teachers would do intro, like as soon as we would walk in the classroom, you'd have like casual conversation time or whatever, and then how was your weekend? Talk to your partner about what you did, and then we would dive into the conversation.
And that would be like build a sense of community.
Yeah.
You know, you want to have a relationship with your students. It's not just business, but there's a place and a time for it. So the beginning of the class, that's the time. Once they get started in their instruction, hopefully they're focusing on that instruction. At home, though, or in a tutoring setting, because I can reflect on times when it'd be you and I, or particularly tutoring, it's a lot easier to, like, think of you when you were young, like 6th grade, you go to the library with our old neighbors. How much time was, like,
definitely
farting around?
Yeah.
You guys are just kind of hanging out and having a good time. There was some math sprinkled in there. But if you have a small group of kids that, say, you're working with or they're tutoring, you really, like, stick to the reason you're there.
Got it. That makes sense.
So I think that's about it for today. Yeah, I think so. Short and sweet. But we'll move on maybe by the end of the week. I don't know. If we're feeling frisky, we might be able to record again by the end of the week.
Look at us. 3 times a charm.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you sometime this week.
Be sure to like and share.
Subscribe. Not subscribe. Follow our website, samosolutions.com.
You can subscribe to samosolutions.com.
Yeah. Or our YouTube channel. We have that too.
You'll find this on there.
And you will also find her book, A Parent's Guide to Supporting Children and Learning at Home.
Available on Amazon.
In ebook form or hard copy.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you.